Hello, this is Father Mark, and it is day 41 of the Bible in a Year, and we're looking at Exodus chapter 23 first, and we see the continuation of some of these laws, and the verse 10 starts to speak about the sabbatical year, and we're excited about the fact that every 25 years in the Catholic Church, this is 2025, so the holy doors are open, it's the Jubilee year. And this reminds us that, the ancient Israelites had rules, laws about, you had a holy a Sabbath rest day every 7 days. You had a Sabbath rest year every 7 years. And then after 7 sabbatical years, so after 49 years, you had a super sabbatical year, which was a Jubilee year, where all debts were canceled and prisoners and slaves were freed, forgiveness and rejoicing. So here we have this, again, the 7th year. And as it says in verse 10, or verse 11, you shall let your land rest and be fallow. So in other words, not cultivate. And they say it was actually scientifically a good thing to let the land rest, because if you over cultivate land, the nutrients deplete, I suppose. So that's kind of interesting. When we get to verse 14, it starts speaking about the fact that God commanded 3 times that every Jewish male in Israel would have to go to Jerusalem and as it says, appear before the Lord. They believed that God's presence was in the temple. But here, of course, we're still in the desert, so they had to present themselves at the tent, or the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, which was their portable temple. But 3 times a year. And so we've got, first in the springtime, you had the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Passover, with the lamb and all of those rituals, and then you had the Feast of First Fruits 5 weeks later, or 50 days later. 50 days, kind of 7 weeks later. You had the first Feast of First Fruits, which was the first. There was kind of 2 harvests. There was a springtime harvest of barley and wheat, and that's when they would have an ingathering. And then at the end of the summer, late in the fall, they had another ingathering feast, which is called tabernacles or booths, where people would come and set up little tents outside all around the city. And it was the harvest of the grapes and olives, which was late in the fall. So you had these feasts, and they kind of correspond to the fact that, the Israelites left Egypt on Passover night, right? So in the springtime, and they sacrificed a lamb, each family, and used the blood on the doorposts and such. And then they wandered in the desert, and then it says that on the 50th day, that's when they arrived at Mount Sinai, and the great appearance of God unto Moses on Mount Sinai, and the fire and thunder and such. And so that is called 50 days, or Pentecost. Penta means 5, so it's very appropriate that, after Jesus' Passover and his sacrifice and his leading us by his blood to salvation in Holy Week, well, 50 days later, we celebrate Pentecost, where we celebrate the Holy Spirit coming down upon Mary and the apostles, and that is kind of like the fire on the top of Mount Sinai. It just all corresponds to what happened during the desert wanderings. Then we have next some words about some more laws. We have in verse 19, there's a funny little law that's just kind of thrown in there in between. It just says, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now that is pretty random, right? Sounds strange. But the scholars say that they're assuming that there was a fertility rite in Canaanite religion at that time. So one of the neighboring countries, or several, might have had this fertility rite, or to try to, cause there to be more fertility among their flocks of goats or sheep, and so they would do this thing of boiling a baby goat in its mother's milk. Sounds strange, but apparently that's the reason why the Israelites said, "Don't do that. You can't do that. Don't do that." And so it was kind of to keep the Israelites from doing something that the pagans were, neighboring pagans were doing. But then it's interesting that Jewish tradition extended. They kind of took this law and they made a whole rule for all the Israelites, even to this day, of never mixing dairy products with meat. So because of that little line in the Torah, in the Exodus here, verse 19, you've got a lot of kosher laws that people are still following among the Jews. Then in verse 20, we start to hear about, again, the conquest of the promised land. They're going to come into the Canaan, and it says, "Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you." And so that's the scholars believe that it was probably the angel of Israel. There's a guardian angel for each country, like a principality, a sort of a higher angel, and perhaps that pillar of cloud and that pillar of fire by night that guided and led them through the desert. It was really this kind of the angel was in the midst of that, or that was the angel in a certain sense. So that's very interesting. As we go to the book of Leviticus, we can see that in chapter 16, we have the Day of Atonement. So besides the three major feasts, there was also this other day when there were these rituals that would take place, and the high priest would do a cleansing ritual, starting from the middle of the tabernacle or the Holy of Holies, or later it was the temple. They would use the blood of the sacrifices to purify, first in the Holy of Holies, the mercy seat, on top of the ark, and then going out to the holy place beyond the curtain veil, to the golden altar of incense, where the menorah and the bread of presence was, and then outside the tent to where the bronze altar was outdoors in the outer court, and then out, purifying the whole of Israel. So once a year, kind of at the end of the year, they would have this Day of Atonement for the sins of Israel, kind of purify the whole of the sanctuary and then the people in the world, kind of, and it was the only day of fasting among the Israelites. It's the only one mentioned in the Bible anyway, and as it says there, they would have certain rituals. One of the rituals was this scapegoat. That's very interesting. And it says that, they would take two goats and cast lots, kind of draw straws and see which one of them would be sacrificed immediately. The other one would be taken, and the priests would put their hands on the goat's head and pronounce all the sins of the country of Israel. And then they would send it out into the desert. Now, they had a belief back then that the desert was the place where demons lurked, but there was demons living in the desert. So that's why it was so brave for Jesus to go out for 40 days into the wilderness. But for me, that's pretty clear that that's what it means here when they say they sent it out to Azazel, which was presumably a demon. And so it's not that they're, honoring this demon or sacrificing to the demon, but they're just sending it out, out to Azazel's homeland, in the desert. So that just makes sense to me. So these are the things we find in Leviticus chapter 16. It also says in verse 29, again, you shall afflict yourselves. So not just the high priest, but perhaps others in the whole of Israel would do, penance. And this is something that Jews and Catholics do, but non-Catholic Christians, Protestants, don't seem to have this idea that for sin, it's not just Jesus dying on the cross, but also we can also, help, make amends and reparation, atone for our own sins and the sins of others, make up for the punishment, the temporal punishment due to sin. We got to do our time a little bit. Jesus, by dying on the cross, gave us took away the eternal punishment, right? We don't have to go to hell, but we got to kind of offer up little atonement sacrifices so that we don't have to be in purgatory, because it's either here or there. We have to sort of make amends or atonement for sins, and we can do that for ourselves and for others.